Selfishness is a character defect. Anger that's expressed in unhealthy ways. Pride might be a character defect that we need to take a look at. Anxiety is not necessarily always a feature of character, but it is something that we emotionally deal with. Competitiveness, I mean, the list of negative kind of character traits can go on and on and on. Part of the job here of this principle is to really sit down, perhaps even at times with a counselor, and understand what you think are some of the real deep characterological issues that we're all struggling with at times.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm Randy Evert, your co-host, and today we're going to continue a series that's called The 7 Principles of Recovery, featuring Dr. Mark Laaser. This is a legacy broadcast, and we just know you'll enjoy the words of wisdom that come from Mark. Today's session is principle number 4, which is character and accountability. Here now is Dr. Mark Laaser and the Faithful and True podcast.
Today we are moving on to Principle 4.
This series is going quickly for me. I hope it's going like that for the listeners as well. I marveled at the fact that of the 7 principles, we're all the way up to number 4 this morning, which is we seek accountability and to build our character as children of God. Great subject there.
Well, there's a lot of different things in this principle. As the listeners already know, we're basing this series of shows on the life guide for men that I wrote back in, I think, the late 90s. And when we were doing that, we were kind of working off of the wisdom of the 12 steps. And the 7 principles are based on combinations of the steps. And for those people out there that are listening, that are attending a 12-step group, they'll recognize perhaps that this principle number 4 is based on steps 6 and 7, which are basically about character development.
Okay.
We humbly ask God to remove all defects of character, and that kind of assumes we know what our defects of character are, Randy.
Right.
But the principles build on each other. And if we spent some honest time looking at Principle 3, which is about our moral inventory, the history of our life, the history of our sinfulness, the history of our anger and anxiety and stuff like that, then if we've done that work well, we should be more prepared for this principle.
In other words, this principle 4 is based around accountability. Is that not true?
Well, it is true, certainly, that this principle is based around accountability. Actually, all of the principles require some level of accountability. In other words, you need to be accountable to your group, to others, to be working on these principles. But in this particular principle, we take some time out to look at the whole idea of accountability in the first assignment of this principle in the workbook. And one of the things that we emphasize in the work is to make sure that as you're working an accountability program, that you probably need a general of that accountability group, which the 12-step programs for many, many years has been calling your sponsor. So let's get to that in just a minute. I think before we move on, we should point our audience to the fact that I have written a whole book about it called The 7 Principles of Highly Accountable Men. And we've done a couple of shows on accountability that are in our archives, I would think. So if the listeners are really interested in a detailed explanation of accountability, there would be those other resources there to understand that.
And just like the workbook or this life guide for men that we are taking these principles from, all of these resources are available at faithfulandtrue.com in our bookstore. So when you're hearing us mention resources like the Life Guide for Men or Dr. Laaser's book about accountability, if you go to our bookstore on faithfulandtrue.com, you'll find all these. They're very easy to order, and we can ship them out directly to you. So back to this principle number 4, Mark. I think most addicts believe, there's a tendency for you to want to recover on your own.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Addicts are historically full of shame, so they basically think that no one else will love them if they are aware of the addict's actual story. So that tends to drive addicts into a profound amount of silence, and they don't share their stories. They don't share their past. They don't share what they're feeling. They don't certainly share negative emotions. One of the first things that addicts can do to reverse the process is to get in a group, find other people who are struggling with the same issues, find out that they're not alone. They're not the only ones to have done, terrible things, and to be able to share their stories for the first time. Accountability really means finding a group of people that are able to support you and encourage you and bring to you the collective wisdom of a larger fellowship of men struggling with the same issues.
I've always been struck with your personal story of how you had all of this shame and apprehension as you went to your first group meeting, right, thinking that you were the only one that had a story that was this shameful, as they went around the room before you even had to speak, and others were able to give a short version of their personal story. It put you in a much more comfortable place as far as being able to open up.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the power of a group, because one of the things we're going to get to here in just a minute is that, a group generally should have guys in it that are farther down the road than you are, so that they are more experienced and practiced at telling the truth, sharing their story, offering help and encouragement. And we beginners, when we first come to a meeting, we're going to need to have role modeling of what it's like to finally get honest. And that's basically in this principle. If we're going to change, this principle is about changing our character. And if we're going to change our character and become truth tellers, become men of integrity, men who are seeking sexual purity, we are going to need role models in terms of how that's done. So back in the old Alcoholics Anonymous tradition, they established the fact early on, by the way, that within the context of the larger group, we're going to need one guy who is kind of the director of the show, the one that is somewhat personally responsible to make sure that we're doing some of the work that we need to do. And the title that was given to that role is sponsor. It has all kind of implications for the business world and, other kind of places. People sponsor us and really sponsor us to be successful. When you go to a meeting, you're going to be encouraged at some point after you've been there for a few weeks to pick out one person from that group, ideally a person who's probably got at least a year or so of sobriety. That's always one of the things that I believed is important to become your sponsor. And in the workbook, I describe some characteristics of what a sponsor should be like. I was just thinking that when I'm out there on the road speaking about accountability and other kinds of things about recovery, what is the role of sponsor is one of my most frequently asked questions. So let me just read this list here to the listeners, and I think they'll begin to get an idea. This may sound surprising because sometimes we think that a sponsor or an accountability group will be, the people who just remind us about things we're not supposed to do. But on the other hand, the first thing that a sponsor is, I think, is someone who will give you encouragement. I think we all need encouragement. We all need positive affirmations. A sponsor should be the major league cheerleader in your life, reminding you not just of what you're not going to do, but reminding you of the positive things that you're starting. A sponsor is someone who you can talk to probably daily. I think particularly in the first few months, you're going to want to talk to your sponsor every day. My first sponsor, if I didn't call him 3 times a day, and that was in the day before cell phones and electronics, he would come looking for me. He actually would come to my house. He would try to find me. But beyond that, the sponsor was someone that I learned to talk to on a daily basis and tell him what I was thinking and feeling and worrying about and anxious about and angry about and all those things. Now, this is very key. I think a sponsor is not someone who is a fixer. In other words, they're not going to just offer you solutions. A sponsor is a person who is just going to listen. I think so oftentimes in the early days, we've never had people to listen to us without trying to fix us. So a sponsor's role should be to be a good listener. The next thing I think a sponsor is, they're going to be an encourager, a good listener. They're going to be a role model. They're going to be a person generally who has a great deal of sobriety themselves. I think a sponsor is someone with whom you can pray. It's a spiritual friend, a spiritual guide at some level, a person who shares faith with you, and at times might encourage you to pray, might offer to pray with you, pray for you. I think particularly as we understand these 7 principles, they are faith-based, so I think prayer is an important part of working these principles, and a sponsor is someone with whom you can do that. The next thing a sponsor is a guide. Basically, if they're farther down the road, if they are a role model, if they are encouragers, if they are all the things we've talked about here, they're also going to want to offer you practical suggestions. Now, I've said they're not fixers, they're good listeners. So, a sponsor is never going to autocratically tell you what to do, but they are going to offer suggestions. And they're probably going to offer suggestions from their own experience.
Things that have worked for them.
Things that have worked for them, or things that they've noticed have worked for other people in the group or the fellowship. So they're going to be practical about things that they would suggest you might consider, and then they will become willing to encourage you. But that's why you want a sponsor who's had success, because people who've had success generally have ideas about what kinds of actions, behaviors, and so forth work. So that's a very short list of what a sponsor is. Mm-hmm. One last thing to say about it is that, and I hear this all the time, you can start out by asking a certain person to be a sponsor, and hopefully the relationship goes well. But there are times when you'll find that the sponsor just doesn't have enough time for you, doesn't have enough energy for you, maybe is not as much of an encourager or whatever. And, I just like to let the listeners who are working the program out there know it's okay to switch. It's okay to say to a sponsor, this relationship just really isn't being helpful to me, and I'd like to switch to someone else. If a sponsor is relatively mature, they'll kind of get that. I mean, not one size fits all. So if your sponsor gets angry, so what? You've got the rest of the group to talk to about that.
Who then can serve as your sponsor?
Well, that's interesting because I've always felt ideally it should be another person who's in the program, another person who is also working the same kind of principles, has the same struggles historically, is really suffering from the same addiction. Now, over the years, I've been willing to open that up a little bit and say that a sponsor perhaps could be anyone who's recovering from some addiction. It may not necessarily be sexual addiction. My first sponsor was struggling with sex addiction, but he was also very successful at recovery from alcoholism. Mm-hmm. So by the time I got to know him at first, he had 10 or more years of recovery from alcoholism. There again, he knew the program, he knew the principles, he knew what to work and do. So I think it's important to have a person that's been successful at changing something to be your sponsor. One misconception is a sponsor can never be your spouse.
Yeah, I was just going to say the Life Guide for Men points out so clearly that your sponsor cannot be your spouse.
That's right.
And cannot be a member of the opposite sex.
Well, that's for sure in our field. And
Right.
as much as some of the men in the early days might be tempted for that to happen.
I'm looking for a really hot sponsor to help me through this.
Well, that's not going to work. And that's the group would slap you upside the head if you even suggested such a thing. But anyway, a sponsor should be, in our field, a person of the same sex and the person who is farther down the road. The principle here also talks about character. Really, the heart and soul of this principle is about character. We're kind of just setting up, having the group and people and a sponsor in your life that are going to particularly help you with this one. Because this one, I think, is one of the tougher things to kind of get your head around. And that is, what are some of the character defects that we struggle with. And so just to list several, selfishness is a character defect, anger that's expressed in unhealthy ways, pride might be a character defect that we need to take a look at. Anxiety is not necessarily always a feature of character, but it is something that we emotionally deal with. Competitiveness, the list of negative kind of character traits can go on and on and on. Part of the job here of this principle is to really sit down, perhaps even at times with a counselor, and understand what you think are some of the real deep characterological issues that we're all struggling with at times. We've already talked at other shows, on other shows, about anger and anxiety and things of that nature. So I'm not going to get into that so much today. But what I would like to emphasize to the listeners is that this principle, really more than any others, is about cultivating humility, for example, and really struggling with your pride, really struggling with what we love in the clinical world to call narcissism. And one of the things to realize about pride and narcissism is that, generally speaking, those people who struggle with those character defects are people who have been profoundly wounded as children and have grown up self-protecting and doing things for themselves and emphasizing themselves and, those kinds of things. So, in this principle, as we're struggling to get free from, some of our own pride and that kind of thing, it's really good to have, supportive places where we can talk about, some of the negative experiences of our early life, the woundings that happen to us. So that's all part of changing character, I think. When we get into this assignment, we're going to start looking at even some spirituality of this assignment. So if we are understanding some of the woundedness that happened to us, one of the things that we're going to need to take a look at are, who are the people that wounded us? Who are the people that have hurt us historically? And one of the positive characters that we're going to want to work on in this principle is an attitude of forgiveness eventually. It's okay at certain points in our recovery journey to be angry at people that have hurt us. It's all right at points to know what the pain and woundedness is all about and, what the actual hurt was. And at some point, we're going to need to get to a place where we at least consider the concept of forgiveness. The Bible certainly talks about this. There are any of us that come from whatever spiritual background, whatever denominational background, I think we would all recognize and accept that, forgiveness is an important part of mature character, that ability to forgive those who have hurt us. So that's one of the things we're going to want to think about in this principle. I think another thing that is going to help us in this principle is listening to the stories of other people. And when we go to group meetings, we're going to hear about other people, their pain, some of the stuff that they've gone through. And I think one of the positive character traits that we're longing for is empathy, having compassion, having understanding of other people and how they got the way they got. So I know when it came to hearing stories from other people at the various meetings that I went to, that it helped with a deeper understanding of how all people are wounded, all people cope with that woundedness, All people make mistakes in that coping. When you put all of this together, as we're trying to look at our character of anger, anxiety, pride, selfishness, all of that, empathy and compassion and forgiveness are really kind of some of the character traits that we all really want to work on.
And it seems like when you find the right accountability group, or if you find the right sponsor, that individual or that group is going to really help you come to a much clearer understanding of all of those traits.
That's right. Perhaps at the end of this show, it might be good to emphasize one thing. I'm just aware of it because as we were reading through this principle in terms of all the things that are in the workbook here. One of the aspects of the workbook that I think is so powerful is that some of the concepts we're talking about today, compassion, forgiveness, empathy, positive character traits, moral defects, these can be kind of vague. And one of the things a workbook is really good at, hopefully, is getting you to journal. I can't emphasize enough that the men that I've seen over the years that have made the most progress are the ones that are able to write and journal their thoughts about a subject. And the workbook will, in very specific ways, direct you to do some journaling kinds of work. So if you're sitting out there today and you're listening to this and it says, well, it sounds good, but it sounds vague, well, pick up a workbook and get into some of the specific writing assignments that will cause you to journal. And by journaling, I'm not talking about going to your laptop or your iPad or something like that and electronically journaling. I'm talking about writing stuff out. There's nothing quite like actually writing things to kind of draw stuff out of your mind and out of your soul.
Thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. This has been a legacy presentation featuring Dr. Mark Laaser. We're going to continue this series on the 7 principles of recovery, and we hope that you're enjoying this series. In the meantime, we invite you to visit our website, faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many free and valuable resources there for you, as well as all the information and online registration for our 3-day intensive workshops, the Men's Journey Workshop, the Women's Journey Workshop for the spouses of the men out there, and also the information about our couples journey workshops. There's 2 of those. So we invite you to read up on the details involved in those events and check us out online or give us a call and register over the phone for the couples workshops. In the meantime, we hope that you have enjoyed today's presentation, and we hope that this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.